So the previous video showed two revisions of the turntable with chunking 12-volt NEMA and then the smaller hobby servo. With that tested and in place, it's now time to look at getting first light from this camera module. So I need to wire up this proto board to take both the Raspberry Pi Pico and the OV5640 camera module. What I've done here, we have the Pico soldered directly onto this proto board, and then we have the OV564 camera module soldered on via pin headers and pin header sockets to this end of the board. Now this end of the board is interesting because it's like a breadboard. These are wired direct across, so I've now got access to these pins broken out on the edges here, so I can wire from here down to here, boop, boop, which should be within my capabilities. The wiring for this camera board was a bit of a nightmare with these 16 small connections to make, but I was pretty confident that the proto board would give me enough space to make them, as long as the combined length of these fly wires and traces aren't going to cause any sort of signal scrambling. I made a big printed diagram of the connections that I wanted to make, and I went through soldering them and ticking them off one by one. The only real testing I could do for this stage was just continuity testing and referring back to the diagram. So the camera and the turntable are mounted in the box on this 3D printed frame. The turntable is actually not wired up here, and neither is the laser, but I'm ready to try and get the first pictures off the camera. I printed out this test card so that I'd have something as a reference. So this is the first image I took with the camera, and it needs a bit of an explanation. So capturing an image requires reading the bytes out of the camera's data structure, printing them as hex values across a serial connection back to my laptop, where I would then split the hex value into RGB bytes and then write them into a bitmap file on my computer, which takes a bit of manual finessing and running of scripts. I started out with a little 96 by 96 pixel image, and this was what I got, which clearly isn't optimal. So I took the camera module out of its box and laid it on my desk and captured this photo, which is of the light in the middle of my ceiling. And this reassured me that it was actually looking at something. So the camera module has the ability for it to just send a test image, which is really helpful. My guess is that it populates the internal buffer with a known image, which is a series of vertical coloured stripes, and then applies some or all of the camera settings on top of that to capture an image of the right dimensions and format. So here you can see I have horizontal stripes, but they're not coloured at all. They're all green. So I fixed a couple of bugs in the byte decompression, and now I have vertical stripes where the white and the black are actually correct, but there's some scaling being applied to the colours in the middle. So making some progress with the test image, but capturing live data, the screen is still mostly black with some hints of green. Now, I'm not sure whether this is because I've got some camera settings set incorrectly, because I'm transmitting the data incorrectly, because I'm unpacking or writing the data incorrectly. There's a lot of variables at play here. So I'm going to go back to the test image for a bit. Up until this point, I've been trying to read RGB bytes out of the camera and transmit them and then write them to a file. In an effort to reduce the number of variables where I could be making mistakes, I switched the camera to produce JPEGs, which allowed me to read bytes directly out and then write them to a file on disk. These are the first efforts capturing a JPEG. As you can see, it's solved the colouring issue, but I've got a memory or address length problem, which means the files are actually incomplete. The camera is still capturing JPEG, but I've turned off the test image and it's now back in the box looking at my checkerboard example. Still something wrong. It's now mostly red rather than mostly green, but at least I know that's a camera settings problem now rather than an encoding problem, because the test image was clear. Out of the box, and you can clearly see the window, but again now it's in green. Back to the test image, but a slightly larger image to see if that makes a difference, and then we can capture a slightly larger and brighter image of the room, but mostly in green still. Capturing more bytes seemed to help, so I went to a larger scale here, but still green. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this green, so I've gone back down to 96 by 96 pixels. The camera has got some internal effects that it can apply. So here's the pink or red tint effect, and then there's also a sepia effect that it can apply. And these are applied in camera, and I'm copying the bytes out. So the fact that I can get these images in red and sepia means I'm reading the correct bytes from the camera. There's not a wiring problem here, it's actually that the camera is capturing a green image. I'm pointing the camera back at my super bright ceiling light now. I've dialed up all of the exposure settings to try and capture as much light as possible, and it's still a really dark image, which has got me thinking about possible sources of error here. I've turned the exposure all the way down now, and I can't even see the ceiling light, so those settings are definitely having an effect. So I turned all the exposures back up again, but it occurred to me that one of the settings I was changing was the auto white balance mode. Now, I've had a bit of experience with this before on other Pi cameras where you actually need a few frames for the algorithm to stabilize. So I put a loop in the code to take a few frames before the good image that I wanted to keep, and that allows the algorithm to stabilize. Now in this case, it's all gone yellow because it's overexposed because I've got everything turned up. So after several hours, here's the first good image. I was messing with the quality, which is why there's a bit missing from the bottom of the picture, but a quick change in the quality numbers means I captured the full buffer and we get the first good image. And there I am, looking a bit tired and grumpy and annoyed I didn't figure it out earlier. It took a long while to print out all of the bytes for this size of image over serial, which I need to bear in mind, but at least I am capturing a half decent image now. And finally I get the image that I set out to capture at the very start of the day. This is the camera in its box looking at the reference target, and this tells me that whilst I still need to think about correcting for the lens distortion for the wide angle lens, my first problem is that I can't see all of the turntable, so I need to reprint and adjust the positioning inside the box. I also need to check the focus because it looks to me like I'm at the near point of the camera already. So if you're capturing stills from one of these OV5640 camera modules, don't forget to take a few frames before your good one to give the auto white balance algorithm a chance to stabilize. So thanks for watching and stay safe.